There comes a point where holding on does nothing but poison you. You replay his name, his face, the way he made you feel, and yet all it does is keep you tied to someone who has no business living rent-free in your head. If you want peace, if you want freedom, then it's not enough to move on halfway. You have to forget him completely, like he was nothing. Not because you never felt anything, not because it didn't hurt, but because your future is too important to waste on someone who showed you through their actions that they didn't deserve you. Forgetting him isn't about erasing your past. It's about erasing his power over you. It's about taking every ounce of attention, every drop of energy, every late night thought you once gave him and reclaiming it for yourself. It's about looking at your life and saying, "This story does not belong to him anymore, it belongs to me." And when you live with that kind of clarity, you stop waiting, you stop wondering, you stop giving him the significance he never earned. He becomes what he truly is. Nothing more than a lesson, nothing more than a chapter you don't need to reread. That's when forgetting him becomes easy, not because you've forced yourself to, but because he no longer matters in the life you're building now. Starve the memory, not feed it. The reason so many people struggle to forget someone isn't because the person was unforgettable, it's because they keep feeding the memory. They replay old conversations, they stalk his social media, they scroll through old pictures late at night. They sit in silence and let their mind wander to what-ifs. Every one of those actions is like pouring water on a seed. And if you keep watering the seed, it will keep growing. The memory becomes stronger, not weaker, because you keep giving it oxygen. When you say you want to forget him completely, you have to start with this. Stop keeping him alive in your head. It's not just about blocking his number or unfollowing his accounts, though that's a good start. It's about catching yourself in the act of feeding the ghost. Because, let's be honest, sometimes you know exactly what you're doing. You type his name into the search bar, you open that folder of old pictures, you reread messages from months or years ago. In that moment, you're not healing, you're self-sabotaging. You're inviting the past back in like a guest you know has no place in your home anymore. The truth is, the brain craves comfort, even if that comfort is toxic. Thinking about him gives you something to hold onto, even when it hurts. That's why the pull feels so strong, but the only way to starve the memory is to stop indulging it. Every time you resist the urge to look him up, you weaken the hold. Every time you catch yourself romanticizing the past and you cut the thought short, you weaken the hold. Every time you replace the act of revisiting with the act of rebuilding, choosing to focus on your own life instead of his, you weaken the hold. Starving the memory isn't about pretending it never happened. It's about refusing to feed it with fresh attention. Memories fade when they're not revisited. Think of people from years ago who once mattered deeply to you, friends you lost touch with, people you briefly dated. They fade because you don't keep bringing them up. The same principle applies here. The more you resist the temptation to give him mental space, the more his presence dissolves. This is also about being conscious of triggers. You know the songs, the places, the scents that drag you back. At first, it might be painful to avoid them, but think of it like detox. When you're trying to break an addiction, you don't keep the substance in front of you. You remove the cues that keep pulling you back. Over time, those triggers lose their power, and you can eventually face them without feeling that sting. But in the beginning, discipline matters more than strength. And here's what's important. Starving the memory frees up space. The energy that once went into obsessing over him doesn't just vanish, it becomes available for you to use. You can pour it into your health, your friendships, your passions, your growth. The more you fill your life with new meaning, the less space there is for him. You're not just starving the memory, you're feeding yourself. When you commit to this, something changes. The thoughts that once came like a flood slowed down to a trickle. The ache that once felt constant starts to loosen its grip. You wake up one day and realize you didn't think of him at all, and that's when you know the starving worked. Forgetting him completely isn't about forcing your brain to delete. It's about starving the memory until it shrinks into nothingness. He doesn't fade because time heals all wounds. He fades because you refused to keep feeding him the attention that made him feel so big in the first place. Stop giving him meaning he never earned. One of the biggest traps we fall into after a breakup or heartbreak is the story we tell ourselves about the other person. We say he was the one who got away, that he was different from anyone else, that what we had was once in a lifetime. The problem with this narrative is that it puts him on a pedestal he never truly deserved. The relationship might have had its highs, but if he couldn't love you, respect you, or show up for you, then the meaning you're attaching to him is based on fantasy, not reality. When you give someone that much significance, you make it nearly impossible to forget them. Every time you call him special, in your mind, you carve out space for him that keeps him alive in your emotions. But ask yourself, was he really special, or did you project your own hopes, your own imagination onto him? Sometimes it's not the person we're attached to, it's the version of them we created in our head. And once you realize that, it becomes easier to see him for what he was, not what you wanted him to be. The truth is, if he was truly that extraordinary, he wouldn't have treated you as if you were ordinary. If he was really that rare, he wouldn't have risked losing you. If he was as irreplaceable as you imagine, then he would have done everything to stay in your life. The fact that he didn't says more about who he is than about who you are. But when you continue to give him this larger-than-life role, you're not just lying to yourself, you're holding yourself back from seeing reality clearly. There's a powerful shift that happens when you stop glorifying him. Instead of thinking, he was my everything, you start to think, he was just a man who couldn't meet me where I am. Instead of saying, I'll never find anyone like him, you remind yourself, and that's a good thing, because I deserve better than him. This reframing strips away the false meaning you've been clinging to and replaces it with the truth. He wasn't the love of your life, he was a lesson. We often confuse intensity with importance. Just because someone stirred strong feelings in you doesn't mean they're significant in the long run. Feelings can be addictive, and sometimes we mistake that addiction for love. But once you stop giving him the title of the one, and start seeing him as a chapter in your story, you rob him of the power he never earned in the first place. It's also worth remembering that people only hold as much meaning in your life as you allow them to. Think about it. There are people who came into your life years ago who once mattered so much, and now they're nothing but a faint memory. Why? Because you stopped assigning meaning to them. The same can happen with him, but only if you stop telling yourself he was something extraordinary. Every time you catch yourself romanticizing him, you need to pull yourself back to reality. Ask, what did he actually do to deserve that pedestal? Did he truly show up for me? Did he truly protect my heart? Did he truly commit to me? If the answer is no, then the meaning you've been giving him is nothing more than an illusion. Once you strip away that illusion, forgetting him becomes easier. He stops being the man who could have been everything and becomes the man who showed me what I will no longer accept. That shift is everything. You start to reclaim your power because you're no longer pouring your energy into someone unworthy. You're no longer attaching weight to a connection that couldn't carry you forward. When you stop giving him meaning he never earned, he becomes smaller, less significant, less memorable. And eventually, he becomes exactly what he deserves to be in your story, nothing more than a reminder of how much better your future will be without him. Replace obsession with creation. The mind can only focus on so much at one time, and when you're caught in the cycle of obsessing over someone, all your energy is being poured into thoughts that don't serve you. You think about what he's doing, who he's with, whether he's thinking about you, whether he regrets leaving. That obsession feels consuming, almost addictive, but it's also destructive. It robs you of your present and keeps you chained to a past that no longer exists. The truth is, you can't erase him by obsessing, you erase him by creating. Creation is the antidote to obsession because it redirects your energy into something that builds you instead of breaks you. When you create, you're no longer a prisoner of memory, you're an architect of possibility. That could mean creating new routines, new friendships, new goals, new experiences. Every time you pour your focus into something that adds to your life, you're taking power away from the past. You're training your brain to see the future as bigger than what you've lost. Think about it this way. If you wake up every day with hours of unoccupied time, it's easy for your mind to drift back to him. But when you wake up with a plan to learn a skill, pursue a goal, hit the gym, meet with friends, or build something that matters to you, your mental space starts to shift. You're no longer asking, what is he doing today? Instead, you're asking, what can I build today? That shift is profound because it moves you from a passive state of longing to an active state of living. Obsession feeds the fantasy of what was. Creation feeds the reality of what can be. The more you create, the less time you have for obsession and the less meaning his absence carries. You're no longer defined by what you've lost. You're defined by what you're building. And when you look back months later, you realize that the time you once wasted on replaying him is now invested in shaping a version of yourself you're proud of. This doesn't mean you won't have moments where he comes back into your mind. That's natural. But instead of letting that thought spiral into hours of longing, you catch it and replace it with action. You don't need to fight the thought, you simply redirect it. For example, if you find yourself scrolling through old photos, you put the phone down and pick up a notebook to brainstorm ideas for your goals. If you start imagining him with someone else, you get up and take a walk, listen to a podcast, or work on something that expands your world. Action dissolves obsession because it reminds you that your life is bigger than one person. The beauty of creation is that it doesn't just fill the void he left, it transforms it. When you create something meaningful, whether it's a healthier body, a stronger career, a deeper friendship, or even just a hobby that excites you, you build new associations in your brain. Instead of the dominant memory being him, the dominant memory becomes the progress you've made and the life you're living now. And little by little, his face fades from your mental stage, not because you forced it, but because your stage is now too crowded with better things. Obsessing keeps you stuck in a loop. Creating moves you forward. That's the difference between staying trapped in the memory of him and building a life so full that he becomes irrelevant. When you make the conscious choice to replace obsession with creation, you're not just forgetting him, you're designing a future so bright that you look back and wonder why you ever wasted a single day obsessing over someone who added nothing to the person you were destined to become. Break the cycle of identity attachment. One of the hardest parts about forgetting someone isn't just letting go of them. It's letting go of the version of yourself that existed with them. When you've been with someone, or even deeply attached to them in your mind, it's easy to start defining yourself through that connection. You think of yourself as his ex, his almost, his mistake, the one who wasn't chosen. Without even realizing it, your identity gets entangled with the role you played in his life. And as long as you see yourself through that lens, you will never fully be free of him. When you attach your identity to another person, you give them control over how you see yourself. If he treated you well, you feel worthy. If he ignored you, you feel invisible. If he left you, you feel abandoned. That's a dangerous cycle because your sense of value becomes dependent on someone else's behavior. The way to break that cycle is to reclaim your identity as separate, independent, and whole without any connection to him. Think about how often you've caught yourself saying or thinking, "I can't believe he left me," or "I was the one who wasn't good enough for him." Those statements may feel real, but they're actually identity traps. They reinforce the idea that you are defined by what happened between you and him. But the truth is, you are not his ex. You are not the woman he didn't choose. You are so much more than that. You are a person with your own story, your own worth, and your own future that has nothing to do with him. Breaking this cycle starts with language. Stop labeling yourself in relation to him. Stop retelling the story of your connection as if it defines who you are. Every time you introduce yourself to your own mind as the one he left, you chain yourself to his memory. Instead, introduce yourself to yourself as who you really are. Someone growing, someone evolving, someone building a life bigger than what he could ever have offered. It's also about catching the subtle ways you attach to his identity. For example, you might think, he was the adventurous one, he was the confident one, he was the fun one. And because you saw yourself through his qualities, you now feel like you're lacking without him. But what if instead you decided to embody those qualities yourself? What if you became the adventurous one, the confident one, the fun one? The moment you stop borrowing from his identity and start building your own, you no longer need him as a reference point. When you let go of that attachment, something shifts. The pain lessens because you're no longer defining yourself by his rejection. The bitterness fades because you're not stuck in the role of victim. The longing disappears because you realize that your identity isn't missing. It's simply been buried under the weight of someone who didn't deserve it. And as you peel back those layers, you find yourself again, stronger and clearer than before. The cycle of identity attachment is powerful, but it's also breakable. It takes awareness to notice when you're slipping into defining yourself by him. It takes courage to stop replaying the story of us and start telling the story of me. But once you do, you begin to see him as just a part of your past, not a defining feature of your identity. He becomes smaller and you become larger. You can't forget someone if your very identity is still tied to them. That's why the work isn't just about moving on emotionally, it's about breaking free mentally, it's about reclaiming your name, your power, and your worth. Because once you do that, he no longer has a place in how you see yourself, and when he no longer defines you, forgetting him becomes inevitable. He stops being a mirror for who you are, and you finally get to see yourself clearly without his shadow. That's when you realize you were never his anything, you've always been your own everything. Rewrite the story with brutal honesty. One of the most dangerous things people do after a breakup is rewrite the past in a way that flatters the other person. You tell yourself he was the best thing that ever happened to you, that no one will ever make you feel the way he did, that the relationship was perfect except for the ending. The problem with this kind of storytelling is that it keeps you trapped in a fantasy. You don't miss him, you miss the version of him you created in your mind. And as long as you keep telling yourself that story, forgetting him will feel impossible. Brutal honesty means looking at the relationship not through the rose-colored lens of nostalgia, but through the clear eyes of truth. It means remembering the times he was inconsistent, the times he failed to show up, the times you felt unappreciated, the times you cried more than you smiled. It's about asking yourself, if he was really so wonderful, why did he make you feel small, unworthy, or neglected? If he was really your forever, why didn't he fight to keep you? These questions don't come from bitterness, they come from clarity. They allow you to separate who you thought he was from who he actually showed himself to be. Too often, we glorify people who hurt us because it's easier than facing the reality that we invested in the wrong person. We would rather cling to the fantasy that he was special than accept the truth that he wasn't capable of giving us what we needed. But the truth is liberating. When you stop pretending he was something extraordinary, you see that he was simply human, flawed, limited, and not the partner you deserve. And that realization doesn't diminish you, it frees you. Think about how many times you've told the story of him to yourself or others. Do you edit out the parts that don't fit the fairy tale? Do you highlight the romantic moments while skipping over the disappointments? If so, you're not being honest, you're keeping yourself stuck. Brutal honesty demands that you tell the whole story, even the parts that sting. He wasn't consistent, he wasn't reliable, he wasn't strong enough to meet you where you needed him. That's not love, it's compromise, and compromise at the cost of your peace is never worth glorifying. When you rewrite the story with honesty, the pedestal disappears. Instead of seeing him as the one that got away, you see him as the one who showed me what I don't want again. Instead of missing the illusion, you start to see the cracks in the foundation. You remember how anxious you felt waiting for him to call, how confused you felt by his mixed signals, how drained you felt giving more than you received. Suddenly the story shifts. You're not mourning a loss, you're grateful for an escape. This kind of honesty also strengthens your standards for the future. Once you acknowledge the truth about him, you're less likely to fall for the same patterns again. You won't be tricked by charm or chemistry if you know first, and that those things without consistency and respect lead to heartbreak. You'll hold out for someone who actually shows up, because you'll no longer be lying to yourself about what love looks like. And here's the most important part. Rewriting the story with honesty doesn't mean rewriting it with hate. It doesn't mean demonizing him or wishing him ill. It simply means telling the truth and no longer dressing up the past in costumes it never deserved. When you do that, the memory loses its shine, the longing loses its grip. You stop feeling like you lost something precious and start realizing you released something that was never meant to last. Forgetting him completely isn't about erasing the past. It's about rewriting the narrative you carry forward. And when that narrative is rooted in honesty instead of fantasy, he stops being unforgettable. He becomes just another lesson, another chapter, another reminder that the best parts of your story were never going to come from him. They were always going to come from you. Close the mental door with finality. One of the biggest reasons people stay stuck on someone is because they never truly close the door. They leave it cracked open, just enough to let the possibility of his return slip through. They check his profile from time to time, they keep old messages saved, they imagine scenarios where he shows up at their door begging for another chance. And that little crack keeps him alive in their world, even when he's no longer in their life. Forgetting someone completely requires an act of finality, the choice to shut the door, lock it, and throw away the key. The truth is, as long as you keep the door open, even slightly, you'll always be waiting. Waiting for him to change, waiting for him to realize what he lost, waiting for him to come back and prove that everything you believed about him was right. But waiting is what keeps you stuck in the past. It steals your present and blocks your future. Finality isn't about whether or not he tries to come back. It's about deciding that even if he did, you wouldn't let him in. Because the story is done, the chapter is closed, he has no place in the future you're building. That kind of decision feels uncomfortable at first, because it requires giving up the fantasy. The fantasy that maybe he'll regret everything, maybe he'll fight for you. Maybe the ending will somehow be rewritten. But fantasies aren't reality, and they don't heal you. They just keep you longing for something that will never arrive. Closing the door means facing the truth. What's behind you is not meant to be carried forward. The life you want doesn't need him in it. Think about how much mental space he occupies when the door is still open. Every notification you see, every song you hear, every moment of quiet leaves you wondering if he'll come back. That wondering isn't harmless, it's exhausting. It robs you of peace and keeps you tethered to someone who isn't showing up. When you close the door, that wondering stops. You stop scanning the horizon for his return and start focusing on what's right in front of you. Your own growth, your own goals, your own happiness. Finality also requires action. It's not just a decision in your mind. It's steps you take in your daily life. Delete the photos, erase the messages, block his number if you need to. Stop asking mutual friends about him. These aren't petty actions, they are protective ones. They are the boundaries you set to guard your heart from slipping back into old habits. Every time you remove a thread that connects you to him, you sew yourself back together. There's also a powerful emotional element to closing the door, forgiveness. Not necessarily forgiveness for him, but for yourself. Forgiving yourself for staying too long, for giving too much, for hoping he'd change. That forgiveness is what allows you to stop looking back with regret and start looking forward with clarity. Without it, you'll always feel tempted to revisit the past. With it, you'll feel free to move forward. And here's the beautiful truth: when you close the door with finality, you don't just forget him, you free yourself. You no longer measure your worth by his absence. You no longer pause your life for his potential return. You reclaim your energy, your joy, your sense of self. The moment you close that door, you stop waiting for a past that will never change and start living for a future that's wide open. Forgetting him completely doesn't come from time alone. It comes from choice. The choice to shut that mental door once and for all, to stop entertaining the idea of maybe, to remind yourself that he is no longer part of your story. And when you do that with true finality, you don't just forget him like he was nothing. You rise into the life where he really is nothing and where you are everything. Forgetting him completely isn't about pretending he never existed. It's about stripping him of the power he once held over you. It's about starving the memory instead of feeding it, refusing to give him meaning he never earned, redirecting your obsession into creation, breaking the chains of identity you tied to him, rewriting the story with brutal honesty and closing the door with finality. Every step you take isn't just about erasing him, it's about reclaiming yourself. When you finally stop looking back, when you stop giving him space in your mind, you realize the truth. He was never the center of your world, you were. He didn't define your worth, you do. And when you live with that clarity, you don't just forget him like he was nothing. You rise into a life where he truly is nothing. So don't wait for time to do the work. Make the choice now, shut the door, reclaim your identity, write your story. And walk into the future with your head held high, because the person you were meant to be has no room for the one who couldn't see your value. That is how you forget him completely. That is how you win.